Hi everyone, it's Tox from critshappen.com. Thanks for watching and welcome back. Today I have a critical review of a game called Fleet from Gryphon Games. Ben Pinchback and Matt Riddle are the designers of this game, and it's a very unique, interesting, different game, both from gameplay style and from the theme. Now, as you can see, I grew up in New York. While we're residents here in Texas right now, I spent a better part of my life in upstate New York. And while I was growing up, my father actually owned a fish wholesale company. And we would constantly be going up into Cape Cod, into New Hampshire, doing offshore fishing, and just having an absolute blast. So something like this hits home for me because the theme resonates with some of the things that I used to do when I was growing up. But is it fun? I mean, let's be honest. If somebody said, hey guys, come on over, let's play a game tonight, we're gonna go fishing. The first thing that really kind of comes to mind is the old fishing game where it would rotate around and the fish would bob up and down, and it's just not fun at all. But is this fun? Well, Fleet's very unique. The whole concept of Fleet is that you are a fisherman, and there's a recently discovered bay in Nunavut, Canada, where there is a plethora of fish. And you as a captain are going to buy fishing license, you're going to launch boats, you're going to captain them on the goals of getting as much fish as possible and turning that into the most profit. The game is decided by who has the most victory points, and victory points come from both licenses and from boats. But why am I sitting here explaining all this, looking at me wearing a t-shirt from a bad football team? Let's get right into the gameplay and take a look at it. Strap on your galoshes, grab your rod and reel, let's launch our boats and dive right in with Fleet. So to set up a game of Fleet, you first start by giving out everybody one of each boat. And the boats are tuna, lobster, processing vessel, king crab, shrimp, and cod. Now you'll notice when looking at a card, the upper left has the cost. That is how much money you must pay to be able to launch the boat. The upper right shows the victory points. Once it's launched, that boat counts as that many victory points when totaling points at the end of the game. And in the bottom left are coins, either 3, 2, or 1. And that's how many coins it's worth when making a transaction. So the ships count as both the ships themselves and as money in your hand. And what I mean by that is if I wanted to launch a tuna boat, it costs $1 or 1 gold. I would have to also discard another ship card from my hand worth 1 gold. So I could discard the king crab to pay for launching my tuna boat. We'll get into launching in a little bit more in a second. Let's continue with setup. In addition, you're going to set aside a certain number of fish crates depending on the number of players involved. 2, 3, or 4 has different amount of fish that are going to be part of the game. And that's part of the endgame conditions. Once you run out of fish, the game could end, or game will end. There's also licenses. You have 6 premium licenses in the base game. 3 fishermen's pubs, which are all the same. They cost $10 to buy and are worth 10 victory points. Once you buy a license, just like a boat once it's launched, it counts as victory points at the end of the game. And then there's 3 different king crab licenses. And there's different ones that all cost the same. They're a minimum cost of $10 and they're all worth 5 victory points. But each one has a different bonus end game condition. So one will give you bonuses for the amount of captains you have. One will give you bonuses for every 3 boxes of fish or every 3 crates of fish. And the other will give you bonuses for the quantity of total licenses that you have. Now in setup, in addition to these 6 premium licenses, you have standard licenses. And each one of those licenses matches up with each type of boat that you'll have available to you in the game. And to start setup, you take, in a 3-player game for instance, all 6 of these licenses that are premium, shuffle them up, and set aside a certain amount. You also do the same thing from the standard licenses. You would shuffle them up, and you would set aside a certain amount, and that would start the licensing options for the game. Now, once everyone has a hand of each of the boats, then you shuffle the remaining to make up the deck. Everyone gets a reference card because there are symbols that go along with this game. and they all have to do with different phases of the game, but it's really nice to be able to show you the turn sequence on one side and the reference on the other. Once you play a few games though, it becomes very familiar and you'll be able to get that down. But once that starts, you roll the dice. Whoever has the highest gets the first player token, which is a really nice meeple that's a little boat, and they start off with the auction phase. So let's go ahead and show you how the game progresses. So the first phase of the game is the auction phase. And I'm going to leave the hand up here face up so you can see what it looks like as a starting player. The first player is going to reveal the same amount of licenses that are equal to the players in the game. So we have 3 licenses, and here we see shrimp, shrimp, and lobster. Now, why would you want more licenses? Well, on each of the licenses, there are abilities. And for instance, the shrimp gives you the option of, when you own 1 license, getting a $1 discount on every transaction you make. When you own 2 licenses, you get $2 off. When you own 3, you get $3 off. 4, you get $4 off. Now that's fairly simple, but they do get more complex. For example, the lobster. The lobster says with 1 license and 1 to 3 captains in play, you get to draw a card. When you have 4+ captains in play and 1 license, you get to draw 2 cards during the captaining phase. When you have 2 to 4 of these licenses, those numbers completely change. You have 1 to 2 captains gets you 1 card, 3 to 6 captains gets you 2 cards, and 7+ gets you 3 cards. In addition, the shrimp are worth 4 victory points each, and the lobster is worth 3 victory points each. So, while you want to invest and diversify in the amount of licenses that you have, you may decide to invest in 1 type of license or 2 types of licenses to really bonus and get those extra added advantages during the game. So the first player starts by choosing 1 of the licenses to place a bid on for the auction. So for example, I could choose shrimp. And I say, I'm going to put this shrimp license up, and I will bid a minimum of $4 for the cost. Now I can bid as much as I want, but I have to be able to pay for it. So I could start off with $10 if I wanted to. But in the early game, you want to be able to make sure you keep cards back to be able to launch boats, which we'll get into in a second. So let's say I said $4, but let's say the player to my left said, no, I'm going to say $5. And then the player to his left said, I'll say, no thanks, I'll pass. It comes back to me, and I have the option of raising his $5 bid or leaving it as it is. Now, if I wanted to go ahead and raise it to $6, and then he passes, I would win the auction. Once a player passes in that auction, they're not allowed to bid on it again. So it's not like I can sit back and wait for 2 people to fight it out and then come back in and snipe it. So if I bid 6, I would then have to discard $6 worth from my hand. So I could discard 3 from my tuna, 2 from my lobster, and 1 from my king crab. That would be a total of 6 gold. When doing this, it only matters what's on the cards in the lower left. It doesn't matter what kind of card they are from a title perspective. It just matters that I discard the amount that I bid on the auction. Now, if I had to discard more than the auction, I don't get any type of change. So that would get discarded and go to a common discard pile, and I would then get that shrimp license for myself. Then it continues on. The player to my left would get to choose as well. So let's say all the auctioning goes through, the player over here gets the other shrimp license, and this player decided not to do anything and not get that lobster license at all. There's some unique things inside the auction. If everyone has purchased a license and the last player it's his turn to put a license up for auction, he basically gets it at the cheapest price because nobody else is going to buy. Once everyone has either passed or bought a license, that's it. You can't buy more than 1 license during the auctioning phase. So it keeps it fairly well balanced. And there's just going to be times where there's licenses out there that you may not want to invest in. Or you may be taking a gamble that the next ones that come out are going to be better. So let's say that was the end of this auctioning phase. I had gotten a shrimp and my opponent had gotten a shrimp and a third opponent didn't take anything. You then refill the licenses so you're going to know what the next ones are coming out. This case, we would have a processing vessel and a cod. So I may not want to use my processing vessel to pay for my shrimp boat. So we'll have to see how that works out. So the next phase is launching boats. Launching boats is very basic. The same idea goes for the cost of the boats, in that the cards in your hand count as money for this transaction. But for me and this other player, now that we have our shrimp licenses, we get $1 off of any transaction we make. So if I wanted to launch my shrimp boat, this would normally cost me $1. But I don't have to discard anything from my hand. I would normally want to discard my cod card to pay for that. But because the shrimp license gives me $1 off my transaction, I basically get that for free. Now my opponent could do the exact same thing. He could go ahead and, after having paid for all of his, he would be able to launch his shrimp boat because he doesn't have to pay for the cost because he has one license. That's a really nice advantage of the shrimp license early on in the game. Now, my other opponent over here on the third person didn't get a license, so he can't launch a boat. You can only launch boats that you have a license for. And that makes a big difference later on in the game in terms of the cards that you draw and the cards that you're going to use to pay for things. Now, once you've launched a boat, you then have to hire a captain for that boat. And hiring a captain is really simple. All you do is you choose one of the cards in your hand, and in this case, I'm going to go ahead and choose either my cod or my processing vessel. I personally really like the cod license, so I could say I'm going to hold my cod boat back to try and be able to get this cod license later, and I'm going to use my processing vessel. I basically put it face down on top of my shrimp boat to show that it's captained. You can do this in any manner. Some people like to put it underneath it like this, however you want to do it. But once it's face down, it becomes a captain card. It is not worth any victory points as a captain on its own. There are some licenses that will give you bonuses for having captains on your card, but at its raw nature, it does not have any victory points to it. But what does that mean? And how does it help you? Why do you want to have a captain on your boat? Well, quite simply put, you can't go fish unless you have a captain. And the next phase after you've launched boats and hired captains is fishing. Basically, in the fishing phase, all of your boats that are launched that have a captain at the helm get 1 crate of fish. Each boat has a maximum capacity of 4 crates of fish. So you think to yourself, well, that's going to happen pretty quick to get filled up. And it does. But that's what the processing vessel is for. The processing vessel will allow you to take 1 crate off of each captained boat that has a fish on it and process it for money, or process it basically for a crate of fish that you could then use for money later on. You can also have the option of using those to draw additional cards, which is really nice. So processing vessels, again, early in game are very good as well. In fact, quite frankly, I can't think of a single license that isn't good early in the game, which makes your early game decisions very challenging and determines how the rest of your game is going to play out. Now, once you have fished, you do have then the option to process and trade. So if you have a processing vessel license and you have a processing vessel boat going and you've got all your fish, you can then process any fish, one fish from each of those boats onto the processing vessel license, and then depending on the amount of licenses you have determines how many cards you could draw, and then each cube also counts as money. And then finally, to end, you draw 2 cards. The person who starts with the first player token would draw 2 cards, but they must discard one of them. So in this case, I have a cod and a processing vessel. I would discard the cod and keep the processing vessel. Then the next person would draw 2 and discard 1, and the third player would draw 2 and discard 1. There are additional licenses that will let you draw more cards at the end of your turn, and that there are others that will let you keep both cards or more cards than having to discard some of them. And gameplay continues in that fashion until one of 2 things happen. The first player marker would move around, they would go back to do the auction, they would buy licenses, they would launch boats, they would hire captains, they would refill all of this, you would get more licenses. But 2 things end the game. Running out of fish crates, and again, there's a different amount of fish crates for the amount of players. In a 2-player game, there's 50 fish. In a 3-player game, there's 75. And in a 4-player game, there's 100. So if this bay ever runs out of fish, that's it, game over. Or if you run out of licenses to purchase and you can't refill the auction, you would finish the end of that phase or the end of that round, so you would still fish and get points and all of those things. But it is an ever increasingly more challenging game. The more licenses you have, the more bonuses you'll get. You're going to have a lot of boats, a lot of captains, a lot of movement around back and forth, and quite a bit of engagement between the players in terms of, I'm going to launch a boat, draw a card, play a captain, get a discount, get more money. There's just a lot of activity happening. But you can see, just from the beginning of the game, it can start very small with, I just get my bonuses for my transactions, and then you can start to grow from there by launching more ships, processing more fish, getting more bonuses for the amount of captains you have, getting bonuses for launching certain types of ships, and whole different things that are acting and reacting within the game. So that's Fleet. This is a really interesting game. Well, aside from hitting on a personal level for me and where I grew up, the theme is not something, again, that most people would go, wow, this is amazing, let's go play a fishing game. But what it does really well. First, let's look at the components. The components are phenomenal. They are top-notch. The cards, very solid. They don't bend very easily. Rounded corners are really sharp. Just very, very nice. The licenses, the oversized cards, same stock, don't bend very easy, but they do shuffle very well. Good quality cards, really, really well done. The die is really, really cool. You don't use it an awful lot in the game, but when you do, it comes together really nice, and just having the same logo on the 6 is a nice little flair touch. The rulebook is very well written. It's actually very small. It has a couple of pictures in here as well to be able to show you what's going on throughout the game. But it is very well written. It takes maybe 1 or 2 times through to completely understand the concepts of the game, but it's simple, it's straightforward, and it's to the point, and it's got a lot of pictures showing you how everything comes together. The cubes, well, the cubes are pretty much cubes. They're pretty standard. But the first player token is kind of unique in the boat. It's something a little bit different and a nice little flair. So overall, grade-wise, from a component perspective, it's absolutely top-notch and does an excellent job. Now, what are some of the things I like? I really, really like the use of the ship cards for multiple different things. I like the fact that they count as victory points. I like the fact they count as money. And I like the fact that you can play them face down as a captain. There's never a moment where you're trying to search to find a captain card. It's not like you're playing a game where you're like, wow, if I just had this one card, it would be really good to be able to do that. You're going to be able to make choices with all the cards in your hand. And while that may sound overly easy, because you're just going to say, oh, well, I'm going to go ahead and play this shrimp boat, and then I'm going to captain it with the other card in my hand, the other card in your hand could be very valuable, both from the amount of money it's worth and from the amount or the option of having that as a ship to launch later for another license that you're going to get. There's a lot of hard decisions in the game, and that's one of the things I like. It starts off very easy. It starts off with a couple of licenses. Everyone bids and auctions, gets the license that they want or don't want, and then it has to plan based off that. And a lot of the challenges come, especially in a 3 and 4 player game, where you're trying to stop your opponent from getting more of the same licenses, but you're trying to get more of your own licenses, so you really have to juggle your resources really, really well. Between the cards you have in your hand, the money you have available to spend, the amount of fish that you want to process if you have a processing vessel, and the different licenses that you can acquire or should acquire. While it seems very simple in that there's only 6 boats and 6 licenses, there are a lot of options in the game, and it scales extremely well. Whether you play a 2-player or a 4-player game, you're going to have a lot of fun depending on how many people are at that table. Now that said, in a 2-player game, the auctioning is not quite as fun. Because generally in a 2-player game, there's different things that are going to happen, mostly around the fact of maybe 2 of the same licenses come up, so whoever goes first bids the minimum, gets it, and then the second player bids the minimum and gets that one if they want it. There's going to be times where you don't always acquire a license during that phase as well, so you're going to have to plan your resources. The really high-end license, the premium licenses between the King Crab and the Fisherman's Pub are really, really cool. What we found is having a processing vessel really early in the game helps you get to those to get the minimum $10 cost to get them going. So it's, again, a balance of, am I going to process my fish and put them into the processing vessel to get money for them, knowing I'm not going to get victory points, but planning on getting some of the bigger, higher valued premium license to be able to help me down later in the game. Now, in addition to all of this, what we didn't show you is the stuff that's over here on this side of the board. On this side, we have some of the Kickstarter promos, and they are a lot of fun. There's a salty captain that will allow you to increase the amount of cargo space on your ship and increase the amount of fish you get every time you fish. There's also an Inuit captain, which counts as both a boat and a captain. So instead of having him as a captain on a boat or needing him for something else, you would acquire him and he is his own boat and his own captain. There's also the nice little meeples that are fish, which are really cool. If anyone's gotten these, I'd love to hear from the Kickstarter backers. What we do is we actually use the fish when we're fishing in the game, and then we use the boxes for the processed fish. So I don't know if anyone else has done that, but it's a nice little extra as well. And then there's additional licenses that will wreak havoc on the game. And while the base game is really, really good, the Kickstarter promos are really, really phenomenal. There's a salvage yard that allows you to basically trash ships. And it scales in terms of how many ships you have and how many cards you're going to discard. There is a casino, which is really fun, that adds the die in and allows you to do some gambling. And then there is the Weather Authority. The Weather Authority is probably the best card in the game. The Weather Authority allows you to roll dice and quite basically sink ships, which is pretty fun. It makes it a little bit more combative of a game and something that we've had a lot of fun with. Now, that said, you do not need these to have a ton of fun. Fleet is an amazingly, surprisingly fun game. When I was first contacted by Matt, one of the designers, I told him, I said, I've seen the game, I've seen the artwork looks unique and interesting, and I have a little bit of background in fishing, but quite frankly, it doesn't sound very fun. And he told me, I'm very confident in the product, I think you'll like it, take a look. And after several games, 2-player, 3-player, and 4-player, this game is a crit. It is a lot of fun, despite the theme. It is something that is very unique. It is something that makes a lot of sense. As dumb as this is going to sound, if you've ever fished or not fished. The cod boat is one of my favorite licenses. So the cod boat, what it says, let me pull one out here, is every time you launch a boat, let's just presume you have one license, every time you launch a boat, you get to draw a card. So what that means is, if the cod boat is the one I'm going to launch, and I have no more cards in my hand, I play that cod boat, and then I draw a card off the top of the deck, and I can use that card to captain my boat, which is really, really cool. Now that scales. As you get more and more of the cod licenses, you can start drawing 2, 3, and 4 cards, which is really, really powerful. And early game, I find that really beneficial. But I was laughing because I told Matt, I said, cod is one of the easiest fish to catch. So it makes sense. You're able to get a captain, get going, and start catching codfish immediately. So again, maybe I have a little bit more background in fishing than the average Joe, and it makes a little more sense to me. But things like that really hit home and made it a lot of fun. Now that said, if you don't like fishing at all, and we've played this with several people who don't, it's still a very fun game. At its core, it's resource management. You have money, you have ships, you have fish, and you have licenses. And all of these things are worth points to you at the end of the game. And what you need to do is maximize both the cards that are in your hand and the abilities from the licenses you have to get as many points as possible. It sometimes feels like worker placement. It sometimes feels like card drafting and auctioning, but it wraps it all together in an absolutely beautiful package, both from components, from artwork, and from the experience. We love it, we've had a lot of fun with it, and we highly recommend that you check it out too. So Fleet gets a crit from critshappen.com. Thanks so much for watching this critical review. We'd love to hear your thoughts on it as well. If you've had Fleet and had a chance to play it, what do you think? If you've gotten the Kickstarter promos, what do you think and how have they made your games better or crazier? Or have you not seen it at all and this is something brand new and you really like the fact that you're seeing something that's not fantasy, not sci-fi, and not the typical genre? Let us know. We'd love to hear from all of our fans. Feel free to leave your comments here on the YouTube channel. You can find us, of course, at Facebook, on Twitter, and on Google Plus by searching Crits Happen, and on our homepage at critshappen.com. But until we see you next time, thank you so much for watching. Get your rod, get your reel, and keep rolling those dice, and we hope they're all crits.